Just going to call you Dad on the program. Dad, how are you?
I'm good. How are you today?
I'm good. I didn't expect you to sound this great. You have gone through hell for the last 3 or 4 years.
Yes.
How did it start?
It started with my daughter in the public schools. They passed a program here called SOGI 123, which stands for Sexual Orientation, Gender Identity. And what that is it supposedly they called it an anti-bullying program, but it's actually a policy. And what happens in the schools is they're telling kids you can be homosexual, you can be lesbian, you can be bisexual, all the letters in the alphabet of the LGBTQ. And where my daughter went to school, it was where the pilot project was initiated. And so she was indoctrinated as among the first in British Columbia in this program. So that's kind of where it all started. So she had mental health issues. I knew that. But the school decided we're going to direct her towards being transgender. Because at that time, that's how they felt they could deal with all mental health problems with children, was just to transgender them.
Jeez.
And the idea behind that, it sort of, to me, reminds me of a video game where you have avatars. And these kids will sit there for hours creating their perfect character. And so now you have these adults, these perverted adults, coming at your child and telling them, hey, if you're not happy being a girl, create your own, whoever you want to be an avatar. Forget about that sad girl, become a boy. And of course, this is very alluring to them, right? This is going to solve all their problems. So that's sort of where it all started, was in the schools. Where I caught on was fairly early on. I didn't realize the extent of it all. But at one point, my daughter went to see a psychologist who goes by the name Dr. IJ, because there's publication bans on all of these doctors, because they're clearly so proud of what they do that they're hiding behind publication bans at this point. But I thought, at that time, this is great. This person's going to fix this. Clearly, my daughter is not a boy trapped in a girl's body. That's impossible. But instead, he went affirm. And the next thing you know, my daughter's headed off to the BC Children's Hospital here in August of 2018. And on her first visit, they're going to pump her full of testosterone. I'm like, this is crazy. My ex-wife gives me a call, tells me I put a stop to it. So they send me what they call an informed consent form, which really doesn't, I find out later, doesn't mean much. And of course, my daughter has signed it, my ex-wife has signed it. I read it and I refuse. I mean, it's talking about all the irreversible changes, like lowered voice, increased growth of hair,
sterilization.
And sterilization. And what this thing goes on to say at the end, which is probably the craziest line in the whole thing, is that it says the medical effects and safety of testosterone are actually not fully understood. And there may be long-term risks that are not yet known. It's in their consent form. And they're asking my daughter to consent to this stuff. Of course I say no. So they harassed me for 4 or 5 months. I finally get a letter in the mail in December of 2018, and it's from BC Children's Hospital. And they say, we don't need your consent. We're going to give her testosterone anyways under something in British Columbia called the Infants Act. And they said, but you've got 2 weeks to file in court.
The Infant Act?
They call it the Infants Act here in British Columbia.
And wait, how old is your daughter at this time?
At this time, she's 14.
Okay. This started when she was 11.
I would say around 11, grade 4 and 5.
Okay, and she's not an infant now. I just want to make sure she's not an infant.
No, currently she'll turn 19 in October.
Okay.
So yeah, that tells you how long I've been battling this. Is that she's finally not going to be an infant, a minor soon. But so anyway, so I take it to court because I'm thinking, even forget about the LGBTQ component to this. Common sense says you don't medically do something like this to a child. They're a minor.
Correct.
Just like you wouldn't let a child say, oh, I don't have feeling in my arm, so I'm just going to have it cut off. Well, you don't let kids do this stuff. But boy, did I have a wake-up call just to find out what I was in the middle of. And so, yeah, I filed what they call a notice of motion in BC Provincial Court in December of 2018. And And that's led to 5 years in the courts and to prison, as you mentioned. So,
and you went to prison. Why?
Yeah, that's sort of phase 2 of the story. The first part has to deal with my actual battle to save my daughter from, being a victim of all of this stuff, of the cross-sex hormones and the puberty blockers. And so what happened is in court in January, the judge said that, for me to misgender my daughter, for example, was going to be considered family violence. And all of these crazy things came out. I was not allowed to dissuade her from, I could only affirm, or that was family violence. So all of these rules were suddenly put on, which pretty much eliminated my ability to parent her on this issue at all. And so what I did is I spoke with the Federalist after that ruling, and I said to the Federalist, I said, well, it's a delusion. I'm going to keep calling my daughter a daughter. I mean, that's the reality. I don't care if the courts tell me to lie. And so I was hauled in for family violence under another judge. And then this is when they added all of the stuff where I could be arrested again. They put a protection order on me and said I could be arrested without warrant by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And
for what? What do you mean arrested without warrant? For what?
Arrest if somebody thought that I was misgendering my daughter or not affirming her. So it was really kind of vague. It was really vague. And it showed you that at the time the power that the transgender activists really had on this province, and probably to some extent still do, although things are changing just like they are in the United States.
Slowly.
That they could get away with something like this. Now, where the change kind of came in, and this is, I should probably hit on this quickly, is the National Post, the big newspaper up here, in January, is when the court case is kind of starting, they put out a front page article on it. Who decides, the parent, the doctor. Now, the problem is they were trying to put my daughter on a pedestal because that had worked well for the transgender activists, is that you shame the father, but you do it publicly. But the problem was all the comments at the end of the story were supporting my position, and they were really going after the trans. And so this is when they thought, okay, new tactic. We're not going to do it this way anymore. We're going to gag this dad. We're going to shut the story down. Parents are not allowed to know what's going on because this is not going to do well for us. This will end it. And that's essentially what they tried to do.
And so there was a gag order against you. You would be sent to prison if you violated the gag order and spoke to any press member or was it anybody about what you were going through?
The honest truth, and this may sound super crazy, but my gag order actually said in it that I could only speak to my 2 lawyers, not even my parents or my family about this matter. Only my 2 lawyers, because it's considered a privileged conversation to talk about my daughter.
This is insane.
That's how bad it got.
Okay.
And so we appealed all of this to the BC Court of Appeal, and we did go into the Court of Appeal back in September of 2019. And we got a bit of a win out of it. We got the ruling about 5 months later. And in that ruling, the BC Court of Appeal said, well, we're going to take away the protection order. We're going to make it a civil order instead of a criminal one. And they also said, I do have the right to dissuade my daughter from being transgender. They said, we're taking away the affirmation model. And they also said that, under the Infants Act, the parents don't get to decide, what their child wants to do, but neither does the child. So essentially what they said is, well, it's on the shoulders of the doctors alone.
Oh, my gosh.
And so the doctors here in BC decide whether your daughter transitions or not. But the good news in that is that when this contagion possibly comes to an end, which it will, there's going to be a lot of law cases and a lot of, girls being transitioned to boys that now have the right to go and sue that doctor and say, hey, why did you transition me? I didn't really know what I was talking about. And yet you thought I was doing the right thing. And this is the reason why I fight this so hard, is because, my daughter's never going to be able to come to me personally and say, hey, Dad, why did you rush me down, to the gender clinic? And I'll say, I didn't. I did the opposite. I tried to save you from going to that gender clinic, but you were rushed there by the government.
Do you have any...
Keep in mind...
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, keep in mind, in this case, it's not about parental rights at all. It's the government that transitioned my daughter. It has nothing to do with me or my ex-wife, what our positions were. It was the government itself, which is a bit different than what's happening in the U.S., where they're kind of, I believe, handing off kids to the parent who will transition.
So we're talking to a dad from British Columbia. He was forced to watch as his 14-year-old daughter was destroyed and sterilized by court-ordered testosterone injections. Do you have any relationship with her now?
I don't right now, and I can tell you a bit what happened, because this is actually part of what they do over there on the far left. Is my daughter would sneak over to my place, and she would have to tell my ex-wife, her mom, that she was visiting friends at school. And of course, the lesbian activist lawyer Barbara Finley attached herself as the lawyer for my daughter. And so what happened is my daughter at one point came and said to me, she goes, "Dad, I can't come over and see you anymore." And I asked her, "Why is that?" And she said, "Well, they're giving me a choice. They said, if I keep seeing you, they won't fight for me to get my hormones and my transgender stuff." And so they said, essentially they bribed her. And they said, pick your dad or pick becoming a boy. And I haven't heard from her since. I guess she chose to become a boy. And so this is what they do with these kids, these vulnerable kids, is they really gang up and bully on these kids, and to get them to transition. And I mean, my daughter was a complete victim, but again, this also destroys families. And that's also, I think, part of the intention, is to destroy families as well. So to answer the question, no, I haven't seen her, not since Christmas of 2019.
Oh my gosh.
It's the last time I saw her.
Let me, if I can, just tell you that amazing things happen over time. My daughter went to Fordham University, and I was working in New York at the time, and they totally flipped her against me. I mean, totally flipped her against me. I was a bigot because I wouldn't agree with gay marriage. I'd never been against gay marriage. I'm more of a libertarian on this. I just don't think the government has any right to be in anybody's marriage, period. She was convinced, because they held rallies against me and everything else at her school, that,
Oh, wow.
I thought I lost her forever. And after a while of getting out of school and being, just being out from underneath the thumb, she began to see things differently, and we're very close today. So hopefully it won't last forever. It's just going to be an agonizing time that you lose with your daughter, and I'm sorry for that. So go ahead.
Well, and that's encouraging, because that's, I go through this with my conscience clean, and I hope that, my arms are wide open waiting for her to come back after, she's done whatever she's doing, which is terrible for herself. But I'm waiting here for her, and I would like to think that at the end of the day, it's going to be those that affirmed her that she's going to resent, and she'll appreciate what I tried to do for her, even though I didn't succeed with her. But I'm, obviously, I'm so thrilled with what I'm seeing as we are succeeding in countries around the world. In Europe, obviously in the United States, so many states, and even in Canada, our federal conservative government, not government, they're the official opposition right now, but, they passed a resolution, one of them being, that they will never allow anyone under the age of 18 to medically transition. And so hopefully they do form government, and they're way up in the polls. Right now, people want this stuff. But anyways, I guess this goes to the second part of my story in some ways. I went through the first half pretty quickly, but so we get this ruling out of the BC Court of Appeal, and we're debating whether to appeal that to the Supreme Court of Canada. In fact, we kind of worked on it, and then we kind of decided, well, we sort of got this thing where we can sue the doctors down the road. Let's just leave it, because the federal court in Canada is pretty loaded up with left-leaning judges. And so we thought, well, we probably did better in the BC Court of Appeal than we will moving forward. So at that point, I fired my two lawyers, not because of this, but because to protect them. So I fired my two lawyers, got them off the record, and I said, okay, well, if that's the end of the line legally for the moment, I'm going to protect them, and I'm going to break all these gag orders because I thought, the world needs to know what's happening to their kids in darkness in these schools. As an example, it came out in affidavits that when my daughter changed her name from her female name to a male name, I was under the impression that this was by her design. No, it was the school counselor that changed her name.